I used to think the quietest people had the least to say, but after what happened at Willowridge High, I'll never think that again. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more narratives like this, and leave a like if this story moves you. It helps us more than you know. It started like any other Monday. The hallways of Willowridge smelled faintly of bleach and stale vending machine popcorn. The flicker of overhead fluorescents cast a cold light over rows of lockers, gum-stuck tiles, and the posters from last year's Spirit Week no one had bothered to take down. I was 17, a junior, the kind of student who blended into the middle of every crowd, average grades, average face. Not popular, not invisible. But there was one person in that school more invisible than anyone else, the janitor. People called him Mr. Tom, though I'm not sure anyone knew if that was his first name or his last. He was tall, thin, probably in his late 50s or early 60s, always wore the same navy blue coveralls with a faded patch on the chest, never smiled, never spoke. He swept, mopped, emptied trash, and vanished into the maintenance tunnels below the East Wing like a ghost. Some kids made fun of him, called him Creeper Tom or Ghost Dad. I didn't. I watched him sometimes from a distance. He had this strange awareness, like he was always listening even though he kept his eyes down. Once I saw him fix a broken locker without being asked. Another time he stopped a fight between two seniors with just a look. He didn't say a word. They backed off anyway. He was silent, but present. I started noticing little things, like how he'd always be near the freshman halls right after the lunch rush when things got chaotic, or how he paused every time someone dropped their books, not to help but to assess. He studied people, listened, calculated, but no one thought anything of it. No one. Until the day the gunshots echoed down the West Wing corridor. It was third period. Biology. I remember because we were dissecting frogs and I was trying not to throw up. Then came a sound I'd only ever heard in movies. A sharp, cracking pop followed by screaming. Then another and another. Panic doesn't rise like it does in books. Slowly, with a growing chill. It hits like a wave. Instant. Crushing. Our teacher bolted the door, told us to stay down. I slid under my table, heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear myself think. More shots, closer now. And then silence. Not peace, just the kind of silence that rings in your ears after violence. Then I heard something else. The unmistakable sound of boots echoing in the hall. Whoever it was, they were coming our way. The door handle jiggled. Someone tried to force it, and then nothing. Minutes passed, long, unbearable minutes, and then a knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Everyone held their breath. Finally, our teacher, pale as a sheet, cracked the door just enough to peek outside. "It's safe," he whispered. "It's over." I didn't understand until later. None of us did, but that was the moment everything changed. Later that day, we learned what really happened. A former student, expelled 2 years prior, had returned with a weapon. He'd managed to bypass the west entrance security. No one saw him coming. He had a list, names. He'd shot one teacher in the leg, threatened a dozen students in the cafeteria, and was headed toward the science wing when someone stopped him. Someone who wasn't supposed to. The janitor, Mr. Tom, witnesses said he appeared out of nowhere, tackled the shooter to the ground, disarmed him in seconds, held him there until the police arrived. He didn't say a word the entire time. Not one. The local news called it a miracle. The faculty said it was luck. But the police, they said something. Else they said it was training, because when they took his prints, they didn't find a janitor with a spotless record. They found a ghost, a man who, 15 years ago, had been declared dead. His real name wasn't Tom. It was Matthew Reese, a former federal operative attached to an elite, off-the-books unit specializing in domestic threat containment. The kind of man trained not to speak, but to act. According to records, or what little was declassified, Reese had gone dark after a mission gone wrong. Feds believed he'd been killed overseas. He hadn't. He'd vanished into the world and resurfaced somehow, scrubbing floors. In a suburban high school under a false identity. No one knew why. Not the school board. Not the authorities. Not even the people who once worked alongside him. Some speculated he was hiding from something, or someone. Others thought Maybe he'd just quit life, left it all behind. But I think maybe he was looking for something worth protecting. After the incident, the media exploded. Reporters camped outside the school. News vans blocked the streets. They wanted interviews, hero coverage, exposés. But Matthew Reese, didn't give them anything, because he was already gone. He vanished again, left behind his uniform, a rusted set of keys, and a note. It wasn't addressed to the school board or the authorities. It was addressed to me, slipped into my locker, folded neatly with my name in block letters. You saw me, even when no one else did. Thank you for trusting a ghost. No signature, no return address. Just that. I sat in the hallway reading those words over and over, my hands trembling. I never told anyone about the note, not the press, not even my parents. Some things you keep to yourself, because they're too big to explain, because they don't belong to the world. They belong to the space between silence and action, to people like Matthew Reese who speak the loudest by saying nothing at all. I kept the note tucked behind my student ID, hidden in the sleeve of my phone case. Every time I pulled my phone out to check the time or silence a notification, I saw that folded paper, and a tiny part of me still expected it to disappear like a dream that made too much sense to be real. For the first few days, the school tried to go back to normal, but normal doesn't come back that easily. Security guards were posted at every entrance. Backpacks were inspected. Hall passes became mandatory even for bathroom breaks, but none of that calmed the tension that clung to the halls like static. Every loud noise made people flinch. Every unexpected footstep brought whispers. Rumors buzzed through the student body like hornets. Did you hear he used to work for the CIA? No, it was special forces, black ops stuff. He took out a whole terrorist cell single-handedly. I heard he faked his own death after a mission went sideways. Nobody really knew, but everyone had a theory, and through it all there was one constant. The janitor's closet remained locked, untouched, like a shrine to a man no one had ever really known. I started eating lunch in the hallway outside his closet. It was stupid, I know, but it felt like the only place that made sense anymore. I'd sit cross-legged on the cold linoleum, picking at peanut butter sandwiches while staring at the locked door like it might open on its own. One day, I found something new, a small metal button wedged beneath the radiator beside the closet, tarnished, old. I turned it over in my fingers. It wasn't from a uniform. It was from a medal. I looked it up later that night. Silver Star, awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. So, not just a janitor, not just a protector, a hero. And then I wondered, why me? Why leave the note for me? What had I done except watch him sweep floors and pick up after gum-chewing freshmen? The question followed me everywhere, in class, on the bus. At home while I stared at the ceiling instead of sleeping, and eventually I decided I needed answers. That weekend I took the train into the city. The return address from the school's hiring records, the one he'd used when he applied, to Willow Ridge, had been blacked out when the feds swooped in. But I remembered seeing a partial zip code during a hall monitor shift in the admin office the month before. I matched it to a handful of neighborhoods, and I started knocking on doors. Most people just looked at me like I was lost. But on the third block, an elderly woman with snow-white curls and fierce eyes froze when I showed her the note. "You're one of his kids," she said. I blinked. "I'm sorry?" She stepped aside and let me in without another word. Her name was June. She'd been Reese's landlord for 5 years. He paid in cash, she said, pouring me lukewarm tea. Never late, never talked about himself, but I saw the scars. She pointed to a photo on the mantel, a young soldier in desert camo standing beside 2 laughing boys. That was him, back when he smiled. I picked up the frame. "Who are the others?" "His nephews," she said softly. "They were killed. Wrong place, wrong time. He never forgave himself." And suddenly, I understood. He hadn't come to Willow Ridge to hide from his past. He came to make sure no one else lost what he did. June handed me a folder. Inside were clippings, yellowed newspaper articles, grainy surveillance stills, hand-drawn maps. "He left this for me." She Said if anyone ever came looking with kind eyes, I should give it to them. The top page was a letter, not addressed to me by name, but I knew it was meant for me. If you're reading this, it means I was right to trust you. Some people see uniforms and ranks. Others see dirt and silence. You saw the space between. That's where real things live. I've done things I'll never speak of, but saving you, that will carry me the rest of the way. MR, the words on the page blurred. You saw the space between. That's where real things live. But saving you, that will carry me the rest of the way. MR, my hands trembled as I folded the letter. The train clattered along the tracks, carrying me away from June, away from the small apartment that held so many secrets of Matthew Reese. But the clarity I felt wasn't one of closure. It was the sharp, unnerving clarity of an unfinished story. A story I had somehow become a part of. Reese hadn't just vanished, leaving behind thanks. He'd left behind a responsibility. Saving you, he'd written. But what if he was the one who still needed saving? Or what if saving me had put him in further danger? Back in my room, I didn't write a college essay. Instead, I spread the contents of the folder June had given me across my worn desk. The yellowed newspaper clippings spoke of daring rescues and covert operations, none officially attributed to Reese, but all bearing the hallmark of a ghost operative. The grainy surveillance stills showed shadowy figures, clandestine meetings, but it was the hand-drawn maps that seized my attention. They weren't just random sketches. They depicted intricate layouts of unfamiliar buildings, escape routes, rendezvous points. And one map, meticulously detailed, showed a remote rural area a few states over, with a single red X marked beside a cluster of abandoned farm structures. Beneath the X, almost too faint to see, were 3 words scrawled in Reese's familiar block lettering. They know, find proof. My blood ran cold. They know? Who knew what? And proof of what? This wasn't just a man looking for something worth protecting, as I'd speculated. This was a man still in the fight. A man who had trusted me, a 17-year-old kid he barely knew, with a desperate, cryptic plea. The note he'd left in my locker wasn't just gratitude for trusting a ghost. It was a test. And the folder from June. That was the real message. He hadn't come to Willow Ridge to hide from his past. He'd come to make sure no one else lost what he did. But perhaps his past had found him anyway. Sleep was impossible that night. The question burned in my mind. What had Matthew Reese stumbled upon? And what did he expect me to do with this dangerous breadcrumb trail he'd left specifically for me? The quiet janitor who spoke volumes by saying nothing had just handed me the loudest, most terrifying mission of my life. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I couldn't ignore it. I had to find out what he meant. I had to understand what proof he needed me to find. The days following my visit to June felt like living in a split reality. By day, I was just another 17-year-old junior at Willow Ridge High, navigating the oddly quieted hallways, the lingering tension from the shooting still a palpable presence. Backpacks were still inspected, security guards still roamed, but the initial buzz of media and rumors had faded, replaced by a weary attempt at normalcy. My classes droned on, biology dissections now devoid of their previous traumatic associations, history lectures feeling bland compared to the dangerous history I now held in my hands. I went through the motions, answered questions, even managed a few strained conversations with classmates who were slowly forgetting the quiet janitor who had saved them. But they didn't know Mr. Tom. Not really. They didn't know Matthew Reese, and they certainly didn't know about the folder hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my bedroom, or the weight of its secrets. Nights were different. Nights belonged to Reese. As soon as my parents were asleep, I'd retrieve the folder, spreading its contents across my small desk under the dim glow of a desk lamp. The hand-drawn maps were the most compelling and the most frustrating. They were meticulously detailed, showing building interiors, alleyways, even what looked like underground tunnel systems in some urban areas I didn't recognize. Symbols were scattered across them, small circles, triangles, question marks. Were they locations, watch points, dead drops like Reese himself had seemingly used? The map with the red X, the one leading to the abandoned farm structures in another state, was the most ominous. They know, find proof. Who were they? And proof of what exactly? The newspaper clippings in the folder offered fragmented clues. They spoke of covert government operations gone wrong, of missing operatives, of high-level corruption hinted at but never explicitly stated. Names were often redacted, locations vague, but a pattern began to emerge. Several articles spanning years referenced a shadowy private military contractor named Aegis Solutions. Another recurring name, often appearing in connection with Aegis, or in the margins of Rees's hand-drawn maps, was a man identified only as the Alchemist. There were no photos of the Alchemist, no concrete details, just whispers of a powerful, unseen figure pulling strings in high-stakes global conflicts, specializing in untraceable weapons and deniable operations. Was this who Rees was up against? Was this who knew? The responsibility felt crushing. I was a kid. What could I possibly do against forces like these? Yet, Rees had trusted me. You saw me, even when no one else did. His words from the note echoed in my mind. He hadn't chosen a soldier or another operative. He'd chosen me. Why? Because I was insignificant? Because no one would suspect a quiet high school student? Or was it because he saw something in me that I hadn't yet seen in myself? I started small, discreetly. During my free periods in the school library, I used the computers to research Aegis Solutions. The public information was scarce, corporate and sanitized. They portrayed themselves as a high-level security consulting firm. But digging deeper into archived news sites and obscure forums, I found whispers, allegations, illegal arms deals, destabilizing foreign governments, unaccountable black ops. Nothing. Concrete enough to be proof, but enough to paint a disturbing picture. I searched for the Alchemist. The results were even more nebulous. Conspiracy theories, dark web rumors, a ghost in the machine. It felt like chasing shadows. One afternoon, studying the map with the red X, I noticed something I hadn't before. Faint pencil lines almost, invisible, connected the abandoned farm to a small rural airstrip a few miles away. And next to the airstrip, another annotation in Rees's block letters. Nightingale Flight, Tuesdays, 0200, Nightingale. The word sent a shiver down my spine. It felt significant, like a code name, a flight every Tuesday at 2 a.m. from a deserted rural airstrip. What kind of flight needed that level of secrecy? The farm wasn't just an abandoned location. It was likely an observation point or a meeting place related to these clandestine flights. This was more than I could handle from my bedroom desk. I needed help. But who could I trust? The police? After they'd let Rees's identity as a ghost become public, I doubted their discretion or their ability to handle something this sensitive, this deep. My parents? They'd think I was losing my mind, or worse, forbid me from getting involved. There was June. Rees had trusted her. Maybe she knew more, but contacting her felt risky. If they knew about Rees, they might know about his connections. The following. Saturday. I told my parents I was going to a friend's house to study for a history exam. Instead, I took the early train back into the city, my heart a nervous drum against my ribs. June lived in a quiet, unassuming brownstone in a neighborhood that had seen better days. When I knocked, she opened the door, her fierce eyes softening slightly when she saw me. I was wondering when you'd be back, she said, stepping aside to let me in. It wasn't a question. Her small apartment was filled with the scent of old books and brewing tea. It felt safe, a small island of calm in the storm. I felt brewing around me. The folder, I began, my voice a little shaky. There's more to it than I thought. It's dangerous. June poured me a cup of lukewarm tea just like before. Matthew was always drawn to dangerous things, she said quietly, or perhaps they were drawn to him. I showed her the map with the red X, the notation about the Nightingale flight. She studied it for a long moment, her brow furrowed. Nightingale, she murmured, her eyes distant. He mentioned that name once, in a fever after one of his episodes. Episodes? I asked. June sighed. Matthew carried more than scars you could see, son. He had nightmares, bad ones. Sometimes he'd talk in his sleep. Names, places I didn't understand. Nightingale was one of them. And alchemist. My breath caught. She knew about the alchemist? He feared him, June said simply. Believed. The alchemist was behind what happened to his nephews. Not directly, perhaps, but the architect of the chaos that consumed them. This was huge. The alchemist wasn't just a rumor. Reese believed he was real and dangerous. June, I said, leaning forward, Reese's note in the folder had they know find proof, and proof of what, and who are they? June set her teacup down carefully. He never told me specifics, child. Matthew learned long ago that knowledge is a burden and a danger. He protected those he cared about by keeping them in the dark. She looked at me then, her gaze sharp. But he left that folder for you. He trusted you. Why? I don't know. But he did. She stood up and went to a small locked wooden chest in the corner of the room. She fumbled with a key, then opened it. Inside, among old letters and photographs, was a small worn address book. Matthew left this with me too, she said, handing it to me. Said if anything ever happened to him, and if the person who received the folder seemed capable and determined, I should give them this. My hands trembled as I took it. It was old, the leather soft, the pages filled with Reese's neat, blocky handwriting. Names, numbers, addresses, some local, some in cities I'd never heard of, some simply listed with cryptic symbols or coordinates. He said it contained contacts, June continued. People who might help, or people who might need to be watched. He didn't elaborate. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a worry that mirrored my own. Be careful, child. This path Matthew walked, it consumed him. Don't let it consume you too. On the train ride home, I clutched the address book like a lifeline. It was a tangible link to Reese, a map into his hidden world. But June's warning echoed in my ears. This wasn't a game. This was real, and the stakes were impossibly high. That night I couldn't bring myself to open the address book immediately. It felt too heavy, too significant. Instead, I focused on the Nightingale flight. Tuesday. 0200 hours. From a remote airstrip. Today was Saturday. I had 3 days. The abandoned farm with the red X wasn't just a random point on a map. It was likely Reese's observation post for these flights. If I wanted proof, if I wanted to understand what Reese was trying to expose, I had to see what happened at that airstrip. The thought terrified me. Going there alone in the middle of the night to spy on what was clearly a clandestine operation. It was insane. But the image of Reese's tired face, the quiet determination in his eyes when he'd stopped that fight in the school hallway, the trust in his note, it pushed me forward. He had stepped into the light for me. Maybe it was time. I stepped into the shadows for him. I needed a plan, and I needed to be very, very careful. The decision to physically investigate the Nightingale flight at that remote, God-forsaken airstrip felt less like a choice and more like an inevitable, terrifying compulsion. It was a plunge into an abyss of unknowns, fueled by Reese's cryptic trust and the chilling weight of the secrets I now carried. For the next 2 days, Sunday and Monday, I walked through the halls of Willow Ridge High like a ghost myself, a pale imitation of the 17-year-old junior I was supposed to be. The surface of my life remained deceptively calm. I sat through lectures on the American Revolution and the Krebs cycle, my mind miles away, dissecting Reese's maps instead of historical treaties, calculating risks instead of chemical equations. I nodded, answered when called upon, even managed a few weak jokes with my friend Sarah during lunch, all the while feeling the dangerous hum of my secret mission vibrating beneath my skin. The contrast between the mundane reality of high school and the shadowy world Reese had pulled me into was jarring, surreal. At home, the pretense continued. I'd sit at the dinner table, pushing food around my plate, offering monosyllabic answers to my parents' questions about my day. History test coming up, huh? My dad would say, trying to connect. Yeah, big one, I'd mumble, my thoughts actually on escape routes from an abandoned farmhouse. My mother would eye me with that worried expression she'd worn more frequently since the shooting. You seem tired, honey. Are you sleeping okay? Just studying hard, Mom, I'd lie, the guilt a dull ache. How could I tell them their average, unremarkable son was planning a clandestine reconnaissance mission based on clues left by a presumed dead federal operative? The nights, however, were entirely Reese's. As soon as the house settled into silence, I'd retrieved the worn folder and the small, potent address book from beneath the loose floorboard under my bed. The address book was a Pandora's box of names and numbers, a directory of Reese's hidden life. I'd traced the entries with my finger. M. Albright, D.C., Analyst, Nightingale. Javier R., Border Contact, Alchemist Intel, Unverified. Dr. Aris Thorne, Cambridge Ilara's mentor, caution brother is MT. MT Marcus Thorne. No, that was the previous story. This was a different Thorne. The name sent a shiver down my spine regardless. It was clear that opening any of these doors would be like stepping into a minefield. For now, the book remained closed, a potential lifeline or a source of further danger I wasn't ready to tap. June's warning echoed, "Don't let his path consume you." My focus remained squarely on the airstrip, on the Nightingale flight. Using every free moment on the library computers, or my own aging laptop late at night, I became an amateur intelligence analyst. I layered satellite images from different years, noting changes in the vegetation around the airstrip, the appearance and disappearance of outbuildings. I scoured online aviation forums for mentions of unscheduled night flights in that rural quadrant, searched for any company registrations linked to the few faded business names on old signage, visible in low-resolution street-level imagery. Most of it led to dead ends, layers of shell corporations, or simply the vast blankness of forgotten rural infrastructure. The abandoned farm, Reese's Red X, was my key. It sat on a slight elevation, perfectly positioned to observe the southern approach to the runway, yet far enough away to avoid easy detection. The overgrown fields around it would provide cover, but getting there, that remained the monumental challenge. My parents' car was out of the question. Public transport was non-existent in that remote area. A taxi was too expensive and too conspicuous. It had to be the bike. My ancient, rattling 10-speed, a relic from middle school paper routes, its gears prone to slipping, its tires patched multiple times. 3 hours, maybe more, each way. In the dead of night, on unlit, unfamiliar country roads, the sheer physical demand compounded by the cold November air and the constant fear of being seen or stopped felt overwhelming. But what other choice did I have? Reese hadn't left me a getaway car Monday night. I went through the motions of my evening routine, feigning exhaustion from intense study for the history test. I waited, every nerve ending alive until the house was steeped in the deep silence of my parents' sleep. Then I moved. Slipping out of bed, I dressed in my darkest clothes, old black jeans, a navy hoodie, worn sneakers whose soles I hoped were still quiet. My backpack felt heavy with essentials: Reese's crucial map, my dad's old bird-watching binoculars, surprisingly powerful, a sturdy flashlight with fresh batteries, a spare set for good measure, a bottle of water, and 3 high-calorie protein bars. I looked at my reflection. A pale, determined stranger stared back. Wheeling the bike out of the garage was an exercise in stealth. Every groan of the old chain, every click of the gears as I maneuvered it down the driveway, sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. I half expected a light to flick on, my dad's bewildered face to appear in the window. But nothing. The street was empty, bathed in the cold, indifferent glow of the street lamps. I mounted the bike and pushed off, the familiar suburban landscape quickly giving way to darker, less familiar roads as I headed out of Willow Creek. The ride was a brutal crucible of physical exertion and psychological torment. The late autumn air was biting, numbing my fingers and face despite my gloves and hoodie. The rural roads, once outside the town limits, were often unpaved, rutted gravel tracks that jarred my bones and threatened to send me sprawling with every unseen pothole. Patches of dense fog lay in the hollows, reducing visibility to near zero, forcing me to rely on the weak beam of my flashlight and a desperate sense of direction. My legs quickly began to burn, a deep, aching protest against the unaccustomed strain. My lungs heaved, drawing in ragged gasps of the cold, damp air. Doubt gnawed at me. This is insane. Turn back. You're a kid. What do you think you're doing? But then I'd picture Reese, his quiet intensity, the trust in his note, the desperate plea on the map, find proof. And I'd push harder, the rhythmic creak of the pedals a counterpoint to the frantic thumping of my heart. Every distant sound, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of unseen creatures in the roadside ditches, the low rumble of a far-off truck, made me jump, my imagination conjuring pursuers in every shadow. I was acutely aware of my isolation, my vulnerability. If something went wrong, if I got a flat tire, if someone stopped me, no one knew where I was. No one was coming to help. It was just before 1:30 a.m., by the glowing dial of my cheap watch, when I finally recognized the dilapidated wooden sign for the county road that, according to Reese's map, led towards the abandoned farm. I'd made better time than I'd dared. Hope, fueled by adrenaline and a growing sense of trepidation. I turned onto the even rougher dirt track, my bike's tires struggling for purchase. The trees pressed in close here, their branches skeletal fingers against the pre-dawn sky. After another 10 minutes of bone-jarring riding, I spotted the faint outline of the farm structures through the trees. I dismounted, my legs trembling with exhaustion and relief. I dragged the bike deep into a dense thicket of overgrown bushes, camouflaging it as best I could with fallen branches, praying it would be there when I returned. Then I proceeded on foot, moving as silently as possible. Following what looked like a long disused animal trail that snaked up the slight incline towards the crumbling farmhouse. The wind whispered through the broken panes of glass, an eerie, mournful sound. The place reeked of decay, damp earth, and something else, a faint, lingering metallic tang I couldn't quite identify. Reese's map had indicated the attic window of the farmhouse as the optimal observation point. The front door was rotted and hanging off its hinges. I slipped inside, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous swathe through the darkness. The interior was a wreck, collapsed floorboards, peeling wallpaper, the ghostly outlines of long-gone furniture. The air was heavy still. Finding the attic stairs creaking ominously under my weight, I ascended into the even deeper gloom above. The attic was low-ceilinged, dusty, filled with cobwebs that clung to my face. And then I saw it, the small grime-covered window just as Reese had drawn, overlooking the dark gash of the airstrip in the valley below. The airstrip was a void. No lights, no movement. Just an unnerving, absolute blackness. Had I come all this way for nothing? Was the information old, outdated? Had Reese been wrong, or had I simply missed it? My watch read 1:52 a.m. 8 minutes until the scheduled Nightingale flight. I settled down by the window, wedging myself between dusty crates, trying to control my shivering, which was now as much from nerves as from the cold. I raised the binoculars, focusing them on the empty runway, my breath misting in the frigid air. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. Waiting. Then, at precisely 1:58 a.m., a subtle change in the darkness. Faint pinpricks of light appeared in the far western sky, low on the horizon, moving steadily, silently. Not the bright, blinking strobes of a commercial jet. These were muted, almost stealthy. My hands, already cold, grew clammy as I held the binoculars steady. The lights grew, resolving into the distinct shape of a sleek twin-engine cargo plane, its fuselage painted a dark, non-reflective matte grey that made it almost invisible against the inky sky. It moved with a quiet, powerful grace. There were no radio communications I could pick up on the cheap scanner I'd brought. It stubbornly remained on a local weather channel frequency. This was a ghost flight, operating entirely off the grid. BBVA plane descended smoothly, its landing gear deploying with a barely audible hydraulic hiss that carried unnervingly far in the stillness. It touched down on the dark runway with hardly a bump and taxied towards the far southern end, near a cluster of low, unlit hangars that were barely visible even with the binoculars. My breath hitched. This was it. The Nightingale flight was real. Almost. As soon as the plane's engines throttled down, two dark, heavy-duty SUVs, their headlights extinguished, emerged like predators from the shadows of the hangars. They drove quickly, purposefully across the tarmac to meet the waiting aircraft. Figures emerged from the SUVs, men dressed in dark, functional clothing, their movements swift, practiced, exuding an air of professional menace. I couldn't make out faces clearly at this distance, even with the binoculars, but there was no mistaking their purpose. The cargo bay doors of the plane opened, and the men began to unload its contents. Crates, long, slender, olive-drab wooden crates. Dozens of them, the kind I'd only ever seen in movies or news reports from war zones. The kind designed to hold rifles, rocket launchers, heavier ordnance. A cold dread seeped into my bones, far colder than the November night. This wasn't just sensitive research or corporate espionage. This was weapons trafficking, large scale, highly organized, and happening right here in the quiet American heartland under the cover of absolute secrecy. Aegis Solutions, The Alchemist. Were they the orchestrators? The buyers? The sellers? The names swirled in my mind with terrifying new significance. The unloading operation continued with silent, ruthless efficiency for nearly 30 minutes. Crate after crate was transferred from the plane to the waiting SUVs. Then, as quickly and silently as it had begun, it was over. The figures climbed back into the vehicles. The SUVs, now laden with their deadly cargo, turned and sped away, not towards the main county road, but down a barely visible dirt track that led deeper into the dark, wooded countryside, away from any civilization. The cargo plane's engines whined back to life. It taxied to the runway threshold, turned, and with a surprisingly quiet roar, lifted back into the night sky, its muted lights disappearing into the west, as if it had never been. Within minutes, the airstrip was plunged back into darkness and silence. It was as if the entire operation had been a figment of my exhausted, terrified imagination, but the image of those long green crates was seared into my mind. The proof. I lowered the binoculars, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them. My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what I had just witnessed. Matthew Reese hadn't just stumbled upon some corporate malfeasance. He had uncovered a major illegal arms trafficking operation, likely with connections to powerful shadowy figures like the Alchemist, and they, whoever they were, knew he was onto them. They know, find proof. The proof he needed me to find wasn't just for his own vindication. It was for something much bigger. It was evidence to bring down an entire criminal enterprise. But what could I, a 17-year-old with a pair of binoculars and a stolen glimpse of a clandestine operation, possibly do with this knowledge? Who could I take it to? The local police would be hopelessly out of their depth. The FBI? They'd likely dismiss me as a fantasist, or worse if these people had connections that high up. I stayed hidden in the farmhouse attic until the first pale light of dawn painted the sky. My limbs stiff and frozen, my mind numb with the terrifying reality. The 3-hour bike ride back to Willow Creek was a blur of fear and exhaustion. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every passing car on the highway felt like it was following me. I felt exposed, marked. I managed to sneak the bike back into the garage and slip into my room just as my alarm clock began its cheerful, oblivious ringing, signaling the start of another normal school day. I had survived the night. I had seen the Nightingale flight. I had the beginning of Reese's proof, but the terrifying question now was, what on earth was I supposed to do with it? And I had the chilling, unshakable certainty that by witnessing what I hadn't just become part of Reese's story. I had made myself a direct target for his enemies. The space between silence and action, the dangerous world Matthew Reese inhabited, had just become my own. And it felt like it was closing in. The days that followed my pre-dawn surveillance at the abandoned airstrip were a descent into a gnawing, insidious paranoia. Willow Ridge High, once a familiar landscape of teenage angst and algebra tests, now felt like hostile territory. Every locker slam in the hallway sounded like a gunshot. Every unfamiliar face in the crowd seemed to hold a hidden agenda. The air itself felt different, charged with an unseen current of menace. The faint, lingering scent of floor wax and stale. Popcorn in the corridors now mingled in my heightened imagination with the metallic tang of danger I'd perceived at the abandoned farm. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. When I did drift off, my dreams were a chaotic reel of shadowy figures loading long, dark crates, the silent, ghostly roar of the Nightingale flight cutting through a starless sky, and Reese's urgent, block-lettered plea, "Find proof," flashing like a neon sign in a storm. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, the silence of my suburban bedroom feeling more threatening than any nightmare. At school, I was a walking ghost, transparent to my classmates, my teachers. I'd stare at the pages of my biology textbook, the intricate diagrams of cellular respiration blurring into meaningless shapes. My thoughts were consumed by the weight of what I'd seen, what I now knew. Illegal arms, moving like phantoms through the quiet arteries of the countryside. Who was pulling the strings? Who was powerful enough to orchestrate such an operation with such chilling efficiency? The names from Reese's meticulously kept folder and the densely packed address book, Aegis Solutions the Alchemist, the cryptic code names and contacts. They were a constant, looping litany in my head, a dangerous constellation of unseen enemies. The USB drive I'd taken from the folder, the one I now carried taped inside the cover of my well-worn chemistry textbook, felt like a live grenade. It supposedly contained more of Reese's research, more of his proof. But accessing it, that was a whole new level of terror. Our school computers, with their easily monitored networks and traceable logins, were out of the question. My ancient, wheezing laptop at home, connected to our family's unsecured Wi-Fi, that felt like broadcasting an invitation to whoever was listening. And I was becoming increasingly convinced someone was always listening. I started noticing things, or perhaps my heightened paranoia was simply painting the mundane with sinister hues. A dark, nondescript sedan, a Crown Victoria perhaps, or something. Similar favored by off-duty cops or federal agents in movies, began appearing parked a block or two down the street from my house. It would be there for a few hours, then vanish, only to reappear the next day, or the day after, always in a slightly different spot, always with an unseen occupant. Coincidence? Willow Ridge was a small town, but not that small. The faint, almost imperceptible click on my phone line during calls with Sarah became more pronounced, or maybe I was just listening for it more intently. Sarah, my closest and perhaps only real friend, was growing increasingly worried by my distracted silences, my jumpy reactions to sudden noises, my vague, evasive answers when she asked what was wrong. "You're acting weird, man," she'd said yesterday, her voice laced with genuine concern. "Like weirder than usual. You okay?" "Yeah, fine, just stressed." "Big history paper," I'd lied, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. How could I tell her the truth? How could I drag her into this dangerous vortex? Even Mr. Henderson, the usually jovial history teacher, seemed to regard me with a new, unsettling intensity. During a class discussion on Cold War espionage, his eyes kept finding mine, his questions about covert operations and plausible deniability feeling less like academic inquiry and more like probing. Was I projecting, or was the web wider? More insidious than I could ever imagine. The address book Reese had entrusted to me via June felt like holding a lit fuse. Its worn leather cover, soft from years of handling, seemed to pulse with latent danger. Each page was a testament to Reese's hidden life. Names, some crossed out, some circled, some with cryptic symbols beside them. A star, a question mark, a tiny, almost invisible skull, phone numbers with international dialing codes, addresses in cities I'd only read about, P.O. boxes, coded references to meeting points, third bench from Fountain, Logan Square pigeons at noon. It was a directory of shadows, a list of ghosts. Who were these people? Allies Reese had cultivated? Enemies he was tracking? Or a dangerous mix of both? The thought of calling any of them, of blindly reaching out into that darkness, filled me with a profound dread. June's warning, "Don't let his path consume you," was a constant, chilling refrain. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a movie. This was real. The consequences were real. But the image of those long green crates being loaded onto the Nightingale flight was seared into my memory. That was real too. And Reese's desperate plea. Find proof. He hadn't just been investigating. He'd been gathering evidence. Evidence that was now presumably on that USB drive. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't walk away. Reese had trusted me for reasons I still couldn't fathom. He'd seen something in me, the quiet kid who observed from the periphery. He'd stepped into the light to save me, to save us all at Willow Ridge. Now it felt like my turn to step into the shadows for him. But how? Accessing the USB drive was paramount. I needed to know what Reese knew, what proof he'd gathered. My options were limited and each one felt fraught with peril. Could I ask June for help? She knew Reese, understood his world better than I did. But she was elderly, vulnerable, involving. Her further felt wrong, dangerous for her. Could I try to find one of the safer contacts in Reese's address book, someone he'd marked as an ally? But how could I be sure those annotations were still valid? How could I know who to trust in a world built on deception? The thought of going to the authorities, the FBI, even flickered briefly. But the contents of the folder, the nature of Reese's past as an off-the-books operative declared dead, they'd likely dismiss me as a delusional teenager. Or worse, if this conspiracy reached as high as I feared, I might be handing the information directly to the enemy. No, that wasn't an option. Not yet. After days of agonizing, sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling, a plan, desperate and risky, began to form. The public library downtown. It was an old, sprawling building, a relic from a more analog age. Their computers were ancient, their security likely outdated. It was a long shot, a gamble, but it felt like my only viable option. It was public enough to offer a degree of anonymity, yet quiet enough, if I chose my time carefully, to allow for some privacy. The decision, once made, settled some of antsy energy, replacing it with a cold, focused dread. Saturday morning. I told my parents I was heading to the library to work on a major research paper for Henderson's history class. It wasn't a complete lie. This was research, the most important, most dangerous research of my life. The bus ride downtown felt endless. Every passenger seemed to be scrutinizing me. The city itself, usually a vibrant backdrop to teenage life, now felt like a concrete jungle teeming with unseen threats. The library, an imposing granite structure with tall arched windows and hushed, echoing halls, usually felt like a sanctuary to me. Today it felt like walking into a carefully laid trap. The air inside was cool, still smelling faintly of old paper, lemon polish and something else. Apprehension? Or was that just me? I chose a study carrel in the most remote, least trafficked corner of the reference section, my back pressed, firmly against the cold wall, offering a clear view of anyone approaching. My hands were clammy, my breath shallow. With trembling fingers, I retrieved the nondescript USB drive from its hiding place within my chemistry textbook. I took a deep breath, plugged it into the aging desktop computer's USB port, and prayed the few. Small light on the drive flickered on. My heart hammered against my ribs. A window popped up on the screen. Enter password. Of course. Reese, ever the professional, wouldn't have made it easy. My mind raced, sifting through possibilities. His birth date? Unlikely I could find that. His old service number? Impossible. A code name. I tried the obvious first. Nightingale. The cursor blinked. Access denied. Then, alchemist. Again, access denied. My palms were sweating now. I tried dates from the newspaper clippings in his folder, names of locations from his hand-drawn maps, even Willow Ridge. Nothing. Frustration, sharp and acidic, began to build, mingled with a rising tide of panic. Time was slipping away. The longer I sat here, fumbling with passwords, the more conspicuous I became. The reference librarian, a woman with sharp eyes and a sterner demeanor than our school librarian, had already glanced in my direction twice. Then, like a whisper from the past, the words from the note Reese had left in my locker surfaced in my mind. The note that had started this whole terrifying journey. Thank you for trusting a ghost. Ghost? My fingers flew across the keyboard almost of their own accord. GHOST, hit enter. For a heart-stopping second, nothing. Then the small window vanished, replaced by another access. Granted. A wave of dizziness, of profound relief, so intense it almost buckled me, washed over me. He had trusted me. He had left me the key hidden in plain sight, in words meant only for me. The drive opened, revealing a meticulously organized, terrifyingly complex collection of encrypted files and subfolders. Most were gibberish without further decryption keys, but one folder standing out starkly from the rest was labeled simply in Reese's familiar block capitals, Ilara, urgent, Ilara. I didn't know the name, not from Reese's known history. Was it a codename, a target, an ally? My cursor hovered over it, then clicked. Inside were several audio files and a series of scanned documents, their thumbnails too small to discern. I plugged in the cheap, tangle-prone earbuds I always carried and clicked on the first audio file, its label a string of random numbers. Man's voice, heavily distorted by some kind of modulator, yet conveying a cold, precise anger, filled my ears, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The Nightingale shipment due on the 15th is compromised. Asset R has gone dark. We believe he has the primary ledger. His last known contact was with Ilara. Find him, neutralize him, retrieve that ledger at all costs. The alchemist will be exceptionally displeased if this consignment fails to deliver. No mistakes this time. Asset R Reese, undoubtedly. The primary ledger. This was what they were after. This was the proof Reese needed me to find. And Ilara was not an ally of Reese. She was connected to his pursuers, or perhaps she was the reason he'd gone dark. Blood turned to ice. This wasn't just Reese investigating a shadowy organization. They were actively, ruthlessly hunting him, and they believed he had their critical evidence. I quickly, frantically clicked open one of the scanned documents. It was a shipping manifest, heavily coded, but certain details were chillingly clear. Agricultural support units. Model X7B. Destined for a volatile, war-torn region in Eastern Europe, a place constantly in the news for brutal, unending conflicts. But the listed part numbers, the technical specifications. I did a quick, desperate search on my phone under the table, my fingers fumbling. They didn't match any known agricultural machinery. They matched, almost perfectly, the published specifications for advanced guidance systems for shoulder-fired missiles. This was it. Hard, undeniable proof. Reese hadn't just found an arms-dealing route, he had the specifics. He had their ledger, or knew where it was. And these people, the alchemist's ruthless operatives, were after him, after Ilara, after anyone who knew. Suddenly, a shadow fell over my computer screen. The reference librarian was standing at the end of my carrel, her expression stern. Beside her stood the man from the street, the man in the dark suit with the hard eyes and the scar that snaked from his temple to his jaw. He wasn't browsing this time. He was looking directly at me, and he wasn't smiling. My heart leaped into my throat. Had I been followed? Was the library itself compromised? Or was this just a horrifying coincidence? I had to get out. Now, I slammed the folder containing Reese's USB drive shut, my hands shaking violently, and began to quickly, desperately copy the Ilara urgent folder to the new cheap USB drive I'd brought as a backup. The progress bar on the screen crawled with agonizing slowness. The man in the suit was walking down the aisle now, his footsteps unhurried, deliberate, each one a hammer blow against my sanity. He pretended to browse the shelves, but his cold eyes kept flicking towards my carrel, towards me. "Hurry, please, hurry," I silently screamed at the sluggish progress bar. The copy finished, file transfer complete. Just as he reached the end of my row of carrels, I ripped both USB drives from the ports, shoving them deep into the front pocket of my jeans, and closed the folder window, trying to look like I was just finishing up some mundane research, my face a mask of forced nonchalance I didn't feel. My heart was a trapped bird, beating frantically against the cage of my ribs. The man paused directly beside my carrel. He was tall, built like a brick wall, and smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and something metallic, like old machinery. "Find everything you were looking for, son?" he asked. His voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent icy shivers down my spine. It was casual, far too casual. Yes, sir, just finishing up a history paper," I stammered, my voice cracking, barely audible. I couldn't meet his eyes. His gaze flicked to my now blank computer screen, then back to me, lingering for a beat too long. A cold, assessing stare that seemed to see right through me. "Good? History," he said, a strange, almost unnoticeable emphasis on the word, "can teach you a lot of important lessons, especially about not repeating mistakes." Then, with a chillingly faint smile that didn't reach his eyes, he turned and walked away, his presence lingering like a toxic residue. I didn't dare breathe until he had rounded the corner and disappeared from sight. I grabbed my backpack, my legs feeling like lead, and practically bolted from the library, not looking back, half expecting him to reappear to grab me. Outside, the bright sunlight felt harsh, almost accusatory. I felt exposed, as if every passerby on the busy street was staring at me, knew my secret, could see the stolen data practically burning a hole in my pocket. The man from the library, he hadn't been a coincidence. He had been a message, a direct, terrifying warning. They knew someone was accessing Reese's information. They might not know it was me, not with absolute certainty, not yet. But they were looking, they were hunting, and the primary ledger Reese supposedly possessed, the one detailing their entire illegal arms operation, that was what they would kill for. That was the proof Reese needed me to find and presumably get to someone who could use it. But where was it? And how could I possibly find it before they found me? June's words resonated with chilling clarity. Matthew carried more than scars you could see. He was a ghost, yes, but he was a hunted ghost. And by stepping into his world, by daring to follow his trail, I had just painted a massive, unmissable target squarely on my own back. The game had just become infinitely more dangerous. The man with the scar and the dead eyes haunted my waking hours, his chillingly casual warning in the library. History can teach you a lot of important lessons, especially about not repeating mistakes, echoed in my ears, a constant low-frequency hum of threat. I knew with a certainty that settled like ice in my veins that they were onto me, or at least onto the fact that someone was actively digging into Reese's secrets. My brief anonymity in accessing the USB drive was likely gone. They might not have my name yet, but they had a description, a location. It was only a matter of time. The copied files from Reese's USB, now on my own cheap drive, felt like a burning coal in my pocket. Back in the supposed safety of my bedroom, with the door locked and a chair wedged under the handle for good measure, I pored over them again. The distorted voice on the audio recording, speaking of Asset R and the primary ledger, was chillingly professional. These weren't street thugs. They were operatives. The shipping manifest, with its agricultural support units masking missile guidance systems, was damning. But it was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Reese had mentioned a primary ledger. That was the key. The comprehensive record of their entire illicit operation. It wasn't on the USB drive I'd copied, or if it was hidden within the deeply encrypted files I couldn't access. Where would a man like Reese, a ghost operative trained in evasion and secrecy, hide something so vital? My gaze fell upon the worn leather address book June had given me. Until now, I'd been too intimidated to delve deeply into it. But the man in the library had changed the stakes. I was no longer just a passive investigator. I was actively being hunted. I needed allies, information, anything. With trembling hands, I opened it. The pages were filled with Reese's neat, utilitarian block printing. Names, numbers, cryptic notes. Many entries were simply names, followed by a string of digits and perhaps a city. Others were more detailed. M. Albright, DC, Analyst, Nightingale, Secure Line, Number. Query, Elara File Access. Javier R's El Paso, Border Contact, Alchemist Intel, Unverified. Meets St. Michael's, third Sunday after Mass. Dr. Aris Thorne, Cambridge, UK, Ilara's mentor. Caution, brother is MT, hostile. Secure email, encrypted. Address in MT Marcus Thorne from the previous story? No, a different Thorne perhaps, But the hostile annotation was a clear warning, the name Ilara from the audio file and Reese's USB folder. It wasn't a code name for Reese himself. It was someone else, someone connected, someone Asset R. Reese had last contacted. And this Dr. Aris Thorne was her mentor. One entry, heavily circled, caught my eye. Juniper Safe House Protocol. Activate Nightshade. Confirm Sundown. Contact via blind drop. Box 7, Willow Creek, P.O. Juniper. That had to be June, his old landlord. A safe house protocol? It implied Reese had contingency plans, escape routes, and a way to be contacted even now. But Willow Creek Post Office, Box 7, that felt too close, too exposed, especially if they were already watching our town. And what was Nightshade? Sundown? Passwords? Distress signals? I scanned further. Many names had a single letter beside them. A for ally, E for enemy, U for unknown, unreliable. Some had question marks. It was Reese's threat matrix. One name listed under A but with a faded question mark beside it was local. Sergeant Miller, WCPD, old school, owes me one. Last contact 2 years ago, compromised. Sergeant Miller, Willow Creek Police Department. I knew him vaguely. A veteran cop nearing retirement, a gruff but generally respected figure in town. Reese thought he might be an ally, but also potentially compromised. Could I risk it? Approaching a local cop with a story this wild? If Miller was compromised, I'd be walking directly into their hands. But if he was clean, he might be my only local lifeline, someone with the authority to offer some measure of protection, or at least a credible ear. The weight of the decision pressed down on me. Every instinct screamed for me to hide, to destroy. The USB drive, to pretend none of this ever happened, but the image of Reese, his quiet courage, the trust he'd placed in me. I couldn't. And the man in the library. He wasn't a figment of my imagination. He was real. The threat was real. Doing nothing was no longer an option. I spent the rest of the weekend in a state of high alert, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, every unexpected phone call. I noticed the dark sedan was gone from my street, but that offered little comfort. It just meant they were changing tactics, or perhaps they didn't need to be so obvious anymore. By Monday morning, I'd made a decision. I had to try to access the encrypted files on Reese's original USB drive. The primary ledger had to be there, and I had to find a way to do it securely. My school's outdated library computers were too risky now. My home laptop felt equally vulnerable. Then I remembered Sarah, my friend. Her older brother, Kevin, was a computer science major at the state university, a legit tech whiz, the kind of guy who built his own servers and ran multiple operating systems. He was also deeply cynical about government and corporate overreach. If anyone could help me access encrypted files securely without leaving a digital footprint, it was Kevin. But involving Sarah, and by extension Kevin, felt like a betrayal of Reese's secrecy, and it would put them in incredible danger. Could I do that to my friend? The internal debate raged all through my morning classes. My fear for my own safety warred with my fear of endangering others. During lunch, I sat alone in the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich I couldn't taste, my mind a battlefield. If I did nothing, Reese's sacrifice, Abernathy's death, it would all be for nothing. And they would continue their deadly game unhindered. The Nightingale flights would continue. The weapons would flow. If I acted, I risked everything. My safety, my future, and potentially the safety of anyone I involved. I thought of the note. Reese left me. You saw the space between, that's where real things live. He wasn't talking about just seeing him, the quiet janitor. He was talking about seeing the moral ambiguity, the difficult choices, the courage it takes to act when silence is easier. He had trusted my judgment then. I had to trust my own now. After school, I found Sarah by her locker. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual, my heart pounding. Your brother Kevin, he's still super into computers, right? Like the really complex stuff? Sarah looked at me, a curious frown on her face. Yeah, Kev's a total geek god. Why? I have this old USB drive, I said, my voice dropping slightly. It's got some really old family research. Files on it. Encrypted. I can't remember the password or how to access them properly. I was wondering if he might take a look, see if he can help me get them open. It's kind of important. The lie felt clumsy, obvious, but it was the best I could do. Sarah studied me for a moment, her eyes sharp. She knew me too well. She knew when I was hiding something. Old family research, huh? She said, a skeptical eyebrow raised. Must be pretty top secret if it's encrypted like Fort Knox. I just shrugged, trying to look nonchalant. It's complicated, she sighed. Okay, fine, Kev loves a challenge, but if you get him started on Linux distributions, don't say I didn't warn you. She scribbled his university email address on a piece of paper. Tell him I sent you, and be prepared for a lecture on proper data security. Relief, mixed with a fresh wave of anxiety about involving Kevin, washed over me. Thanks, Sarah. You're a lifesaver. Yeah, she said, still looking at me a little too closely. Just be careful, okay? You've been acting really weird lately. I will, I promised, though the words felt hollow even to me. That evening, I emailed Kevin using a new anonymous email address I created at a public library terminal far from my neighborhood. I explained the situation vaguely. An old, encrypted drive, forgotten password, important personal files. His reply came within an hour. Intriguing. Encryption type, file system. Any idea of the OS it was created on? Bring it by my lab at the uni tomorrow afternoon. If it's solvable, I'll solve it. For a pizza. It felt too easy. Almost anticlimactic. But the meeting was set. Tomorrow, I would hand over Reese's original USB drive, the one potentially containing the primary ledger, to a college student I barely knew. The risk was immense. If Kevin couldn't maintain security, if his curiosity got the better of him and he looked too deeply, or if they were somehow monitoring him too. But what choice did I have? The man in the library had made it clear. My time for quiet investigation was over. I needed those files, and I needed them now. The thought of finally seeing what Reese had risked, and perhaps lost, his life for, was terrifying and exhilarating. The space between silence and action was about to get very loud indeed. The university campus buzzed with the usual midday energy, a stark contrast to the cold knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Finding Kevin's computer, Science Lab felt like navigating a maze, corridors lined with cryptic posters, and the low hum of powerful machines. He was exactly as Sarah had described, tall, lanky, with a shock of unruly dark hair, intense eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses, and an air of someone who communicated more fluently with code than with people. His lab was a controlled chaos of spare computer parts, soldering irons, multiple monitors displaying scrolling lines of green text, and the distinct, slightly acrid smell of warm electronics. "You're the kid with the mystery drive?" Kevin asked without preamble, barely looking up from a circuit board he was meticulously examining. "Yeah, that's me," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally high. I held out Reese's USB drive. "Thanks for seeing me." He finally looked up, taking the drive, turning it over in his long fingers. His eyes, magnified by his glasses, were surprisingly sharp, analytical. "No promises. Depends on the encryption. Some of this old stuff is either child's play or a nightmare." "What was on it, or what do you think was on it?" I hesitated. How much could I reveal? "Family research," I repeated the flimsy lie. "My, uncle was into some pretty obscure historical stuff. He passed away, and this is all that's left of his notes." Kevin raised an eyebrow, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "Right. Obscure historical stuff that requires military-grade encryption." He didn't press, though. He just shrugged. "Whatever. Your secrets are your own. As long as it's not like illegal nuclear launch codes, I'm good. Pizza's still on the table, though." He plugged the drive into a custom-built tower humming quietly beneath his desk. A series of windows popped up on one of his monitors. He typed rapidly, his fingers flying across the keyboard, muttering to himself about file systems and cryptographic hashes. I stood awkwardly, shifting my weight, trying not to look as terrified as I felt. This was it, the culmination of weeks, of fear, paranoia, and desperate investigation. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were Kevin's typing, the hum of the computers, and the frantic thumping of my own heart. "Okay, got past the initial partition lock," Kevin announced, suddenly leaning closer to the screen. "Standard AES 256 on the main volume, but there's a secondary biometric layer. Interesting. Your uncle was either very careful or very paranoid." Biometric layer. Reese was even more thorough than I thought. How could Kevin possibly bypass that? I started. "Probably," Kevin said, already typing again. "Most commercial biometrics are more security theater than actual security, if you know where to poke. Give me a bit." More tense minutes passed. Kevin worked with a focused intensity that was almost hypnotic. He ran scripts, bypassed prompts, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, with a soft click, a new window opened on the screen displaying a list of folders. My breath caught. "Bingo," Kevin said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied grin. "Your uncle's obscure historical research awaits. Looks like a lot of heavily encrypted data packets, some audio logs, location trackers. Standard spook stuff, actually." He glanced at me. "You sure this is just family research?" I ignored the question, my eyes glued to the screen. There were dozens of folders, most with alphanumeric codenames, but one stood out, labeled clearly, Ledger Nightingale Primary. This was it. The primary ledger, the proof Reese died for or disappeared for. Can you open that one?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Kevin navigated to it, clicked. Another password prompt. Smaller, this time. "Secondary encryption on key files. Smart," he muttered. "Okay, this one might take a bit longer. Brute force is an option, but messy. Any idea what this password might be? Something personally significant to your uncle." My mind raced. What would Reese use for his most vital secret? The note. "You saw me, even when no one else did. Thank you for trusting a ghost." And then the name June had given me, his real name. "Try Matthew Reese," I said. Kevin typed it in. "Access denied." "Try Reese Ghost," I suggested. A wild guess, Kevin typed. "Access denied." Damn, my mind was blank. I was so close. Kevin sighed. "Okay, let me try a few dictionary attacks. Common variations. This could take hours, days even, if it's a strong passphrase." As he started setting up the attack, my eyes scanned the other folder names, looking for any clue, any connection. Many were just strings of numbers, but one, near the bottom, was simply labeled June Safe. June, Reese's landlord, his confidant. "Wait," I said, "try Juniper." June had said Reese sometimes called her that. Kevin stopped the brute force attack, typed in Juniper. The screen flickered, and then the folder opened. Inside were not more encrypted files, but a single simple text document and several image files. My heart hammered. "Open the text document," I urged. Kevin clicked. The document filled the screen. It wasn't a ledger in the traditional sense. It was a list. A long, chilling list of dates, flight call signs, all variations of Nightingale, cargo descriptions, disguised as specialized agricultural equipment or mining machinery components, destinations, all conflict zones or unstable regions, and payment routing numbers through a complex web of offshore banks and shell corporations. At the bottom of the list was a summary statement. Total estimated value of illicit arms transfers facilitated by Aegis Solutions under Project Nightingale. Direct oversight The Alchemist, XXX million USD. The number was staggering. This was it, the primary ledger. Clear, concise, damning. "Holy," Kevin breathed, reading over my shoulder. "Kid, your uncle wasn't researching history. He was sitting on a freaking goldmine of international arms trafficking. This is serious. Like federal prison serious for a lot of people." Before I could respond, his eyes widened at something else on the screen. "Wait a minute. Those bank routing numbers, some of those Shell Corp. I've seen them before. In some dark web forums discussing, Jesus, kid, what have you stumbled into?" His face had gone pale. "This alchemist, he's not just a myth, he's real, and these guys Aegis, They don't mess around. As if on cue, Kevin's own encrypted phone, sitting on a nearby workbench, let out a series of sharp, urgent beeps, a sound I hadn't heard before. He snatched it up, his eyes darting to the screen. "Shit," he muttered, his voice suddenly tight, with genuine fear. "Perimeter alarm. My lab's network just got pinged by an external intrusion attempt, heavy duty, not script kiddies." He looked at me, his earlier bravado gone. "They know, or they know someone is accessing this data. We need to go. Now." He yanked Reese's USB from his machine, then my new one. "Copy everything you can from that text file onto a fresh drive." "Fast," he barked, already grabbing another blank USB from a drawer. "I'll wipe my system logs." My fingers fumbled as I tried to copy the text file. The seconds stretched. Then we heard it. Heavy footsteps in the corridor outside the lab, getting closer. "Too late," Kevin whispered, his face grim. He killed the power to his main tower, plunging his primary monitors into darkness. "Back door, fire escape, move." He grabbed my arm, pulling me towards a small, unassuming door at the back of the lab I hadn't noticed before. Just as we reached it, the main lab door burst open. The man with the scar, and two others, equally menacing, their faces hard, their eyes cold. They were armed. "Well, well," Scarface said, a predatory smile spreading across his lips. "Looks like the little historian brought a friend." And found what he was looking for. His gaze flickered to the darkened monitors. "Tsk, tsk, naughty." Kevin pushed me behind him. "Who the hell are you guys? This is university property." Scarface chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "We're the final exam proctors. And you, son," his eyes locked onto me, "failed. Hand over the drives, all of them, and no one gets hurt. Much." My mind raced, trapped. No escape. This was it. Then I remembered Reese's address book, the entry for Sergeant Miller, WCPD. Owes me one. It was an insane, desperate long shot. I hadn't had time to contact him, but I had memorized the direct line Reese had listed. While Scarface was focused on Kevin, I slowly, carefully reached into my pocket for my own cheap burner phone, the one I still carried out of habit. My fingers fumbled, dialing the number. From memory, praying Miller was on duty, praying he'd even answer. "Don't be stupid, kid," one of the other thugs growled, taking a step towards me. My phone connected. "One ring, two." "Miller," a gruff voice answered. "Sergeant Miller," I gasped, trying to keep my voice low. It's about Matthew Reese. I'm at the university, computer science lab, room 3B. They're here. They found me." Scarface spun around, his eyes blazing. "What did you say?" He lunged. I dropped the phone, shouting into it, "Code Nightingale, asset R compromised." Phrases I'd heard on Reese's audio log, hoping they meant something to Miller. Then Scarface was on me. His hand clamped over my mouth, an arm like a steel band around my chest, dragging me back. Kevin tried to intervene, but the other two thugs swarmed him, a sickening thud echoing as something hard connected with his head. He went down. "You shouldn't have done that, kid," Scarface hissed in my ear, his breath hot and foul. "Now it gets messy." He twisted my arm painfully. "The drives. Where are they?" Tears of pain and terror streamed down my face. It was over. I had failed. And then, sirens. Faint at first, but growing rapidly louder. Closer. Scarface froze. His eyes darted towards the window. "Cops? How?" The wail of the sirens was undeniable now, converging on the building. He cursed, shoving me hard against a workbench. "Forget the drives. We're blown. Get out." The three men scrambled for the main lab door, just as uniformed officers, guns drawn, burst in from the fire escape exit Kevin had been aiming for. "Freeze, police!" Chaos erupted. Shouts, scrambling. The glint of steel. I saw Sergeant Miller older, heavier than I remembered, but his eyes sharp, his gun steady, leading the charge. He'd come. He'd actually come. One of Thorne's, or the alchemist's men, tried to make a break for it. But Miller was faster, tackling him to the ground with surprising agility. The other two raised their hands, realizing they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. Scarface looked murderous, but even he knew when the game was up. Within minutes, it was over. The three operatives were cuffed, read their rights. Kevin was groaning, holding his head but alive. Paramedics were called. Miller walked over to me, his face grim. "You all right, son?" I could only nod, still shaking, my voice gone. He picked up my dropped phone, saw the call log. "Matthew Reese," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Haven't heard that name in a long time, thought he was dead." He looked at me, his eyes hard but not unkind. "Looks like you and I have a lot to talk about, kid. A whole hell of a lot. 6 months. Later, the alchemist was never caught. Aegis Solutions was officially dismantled after a series of raids and arrests based on the information from Reese's ledger, information I, with Kevin's now heavily secured help, managed to pass anonymously. To a trusted investigative journalist, Reese had listed in his address book, under Nightingale Last Resort. It caused a global scandal, but the true puppet master remained in the shadows. Kevin recovered from his concussion with a newfound respect for family research and a serious upgrade to his lab's security. He never asked for the pizza, said surviving was payment enough. June passed away peacefully in her sleep a few months after the raid. I attended her small, quiet funeral, feeling like I'd lost another link to Reese. Sergeant Miller retired a month later, but not before ensuring my testimony was handled discreetly, protecting me from the worst of the fallout. He told me Reese had once saved his life overseas, a debt he felt he'd only partially repaid. He also told me, "Reese was a good man, kid. Flawed, haunted, but good. Don't ever forget what you did for him, or what he did for you." And Reese? Matthew, Mr. Tom Reese, remained a ghost. No trace of him was ever found. No confirmation if he was alive or dead. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I still look at his worn address book, at the note he left in my locker. Didn't find all the proof. I didn't catch the alchemist, I didn't bring Reese back, but I did what he asked. I saw the space between, I acted, and in the silence that followed I understood. Some battles are never truly won, some ghosts never truly rest, but sometimes just shining a small light into the darkness just for a moment is enough. It has to be. I still volunteer at the youth outreach, listening to the quiet ones, seeing the details others miss. And every now and then when I see a kid struggling, looking lost, I buy them a quiet meal. No questions asked. Because that's where real things live. In the space between, the journey of our young and the enigmatic Mr. Tom, Matthew Reese, shows that even ordinary people can be called to extraordinary courage, and that the quietest actions can have the loudest impact. If their story of secrets, bravery, and the enduring power of trust moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more narratives that make you think, and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe happened to Matthew Reese? Thank you for joining us.